How come you're awake? Can't fall asleep? You're tossing about. Of course I can't sleep. Your gown's unbuttoned. Like a little child. Don't move. There. Now I can't sleep either. Well, are you gonna make it up to me? If you behave and go to sleep now, that's all I want. Don't toss around. Would you like to do something? You want me to tell you a story? I've never told one before. Never mind. Since we're both awake, I can give it a try. What story would you like to hear? If anything will do, then let's start with Sleeping Beauty. Why are you laughing? Stop laughing. Lean on me. I'll begin. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who didn't have any children. They were very sad and very distressed. One day, when the queen was walking along the river, a little fish popped its head out of the water and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. You shall give birth to a daughter soon." After some time, that little fish's words came true. The queen had a very beautiful baby girl. The king was so happy that he decided to hold a grand feast. He invited his family, friends, and foreign guests. In addition, he also invited almost all the witches and allowed them to bestow good wishes upon his daughter. In this kingdom, there were 13 witches in total. But the king only had 12 golden plates, so he only invited 12 of the witches and left one out. After the grand feast, all guests presented the little princess with their gifts. One witch gave her virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on. They gave her everything that anyone could wish for in the world. After the 11th witch blessed the princess, the 13th witch, who had not been invited, arrived. Feeling outraged about not receiving an invitation, she wanted to take revenge on the king by bestowing a wicked curse upon the princess. So, she called out in a loud voice, "When the princess is 15 years old, she shall prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." The guests were all horrified. But just then, the 12th witch, who had not yet bestowed her wish, stepped forward and said, "The wicked curse indeed shall be fulfilled, but the princess will survive. She shall not die, but instead shall fall into a deep sleep that will last 100 years. In order to prevent the princess from befalling that misfortune, the king commanded that all the spindles in the kingdom be collected and destroyed. Huh? What is it? Are you uncomfortable? Okay, I surrender. Lie in my arms. Don't toss around. If you still want to listen. Over the years, all the blessings of the witches came true. She grew to be beautiful, gentle, and graceful. Everyone who saw her could not help but love her. On her 15th birthday, the king and queen went out and left the princess alone. She wandered about the whole palace, and finally, she came to an old tower. In the tower, there was a narrow staircase. At the end of the staircase stood a door. A golden key was sticking out of the lock. When she turned the golden key, the door flew open. Inside the room sat an old woman who was busily spinning flax. The princess was very interested. Stepping forward, she took the spindle and tried to spin it. But the moment she touched the spindle, she fell upon the floor and lost consciousness. The wicked curse had been fulfilled. The princess lay in a deep sleep. What is it? Dummy. You asked me to tell you a story. Well, shall we go on? Come here. Just then, the king and queen returned. Upon walking into the hall, they fell asleep too. The horses in the stable, the dogs in the yard, and the doves on the roof also fell asleep. Even the fire in the hearth died out. Everything stood still in a deep sleep. Before long, a hedge of wild grass began to grow around the palace. Year after year, it grew higher and higher, thicker and thicker, until at last, nothing of the palace could be seen, not even the roof. From then on, many princes came and tried to force their way through the hedge and into the palace. But they failed. They all ended up trapped in the thorns. Many years had passed, until one day another prince came to the country and heard about the tale. He had heard that there was once a beautiful palace, and that in the palace lived a beautiful princess who had been trapped in a deep sleep along with everyone else in the palace. He'd also heard that many princes had come in search of the palace and tried to make their way through the hedge, but they all failed. He was in awe of the tale of this beautiful princess, and although others had tried to persuade him to give up, the brave prince still insisted on going through the hedge. On the day when the 100 years had just ended, the prince stood outside the palace and saw the hedge was covered with beautiful flowers. He walked through the hedge easily as the shrubs made way for him. However, the shrubs secretly closed behind him. Finally, he arrived at the palace. In the courtyard, the prince saw the dogs lying asleep on the ground, the horses asleep in the stable, and the doves asleep on the roof with their heads tucked under their wings. He continued forward. All was so still that he could even hear his own breathing. At last, he reached the ancient tower and opened the door into the little room where the princess was. She lay sound asleep, looking so beautiful that he could not take his wide eyes off of her. As he looked at her, he could not help but bend down and kiss her. The kiss woke the princess up. She opened her eyes and stared at the prince affectionately. Then the prince took her into his arms and walked out of the tower. At that moment, the king and queen woke up too. So did everyone in the palace. They looked at each other with curious eyes, as if they didn't understand what had happened. The horses stood up and began swaying. The dogs jumped joyfully. The doves raised their heads, looked around, flapped their wings, and flew to the field. Everything was back to normal. The prince and princess held a grand wedding ceremony, and they lived happily together for the rest of their lives. Huh? How do I feel about it? I just think 100 years is too long. If I were the prince, I would not make my beloved girl wait for 100 years. What would I do? I would go to her immediately. Who is she? I can't think of anybody else except some dummy. Are you sleepy? Good night.